All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the biggest mystery there is, consciousness. You know, that little voice in your head, your experience of the color red, that feeling of just being you. What is it? And where on earth does it come from? Let's get into it.
But let's just start with a really simple but kind of heavy question. The world you see and feel around you at this very moment, is it the real world or is it something else entirely? Something stranger? The answer might be way weirder than you think.
So, what we're going to do is take a rapid-fire tour through a gallery of absolutely mind-bending ideas. We're talking some of the most radical theories of consciousness out there, pulling from neuroscience, from physics, and philosophy. So yeah, you're going to want to strap in for this one.
Okay, so our first stop has to be the brain itself, right? These first two theories, they argue that consciousness isn't some mystical property floating around in the ether. Nope, it's a highly sophisticated process. Basically, a story the brain tells itself about what it's doing. So first up, we've got neuroscientist Michael Graziano and his attention schema theory. The core idea here is pretty cool. You know how your brain builds a model of your own body so you can move around without bumping into things? Well, Graziano argues it does the exact same thing for its own attention. It builds a simplified model, kind of like a little cartoon, of what it's focusing on. And that model, that is what you experience as consciousness. Here's the metaphor, and it's a good one. Your conscious experience, that's the movie playing on the screen. It's vivid. It's everything you're aware of. But the projector, the actual nuts and bolts mechanism that's creating the show, you never see it. It's completely hidden from view. You only ever get to experience the result, not the process. Now, researcher Joscha Bach, he takes this idea and pushes it even further. He basically says, you know that feeling of being live in the moment? It's not actually live. He thinks what you're experiencing is actually a memory of what your brain just processed a moment ago. Your brain sucks in this massive amount of data, it compresses it down, and what you experience as now is really just your brain reading that super recent memory file. Bach's favorite metaphor for this is a huge orchestra. Think about it. All the different parts of your brain are like this massive orchestra, all these different sections playing at once in parallel. You can't possibly experience all of that at the same time, right? It would be chaos. So the conductor, who Bach says lives in the prefrontal cortex, integrates the key parts into one single coherent story. And that story is what you get to hear. It's not the performance itself, but it's the only report of the performance you will ever get. Okay, so if the brain is just telling us a story, that leads to a pretty big question. How much does that story actually match up with reality? Our next set of theories, well, they make an even more radical claim. They suggest the world we see isn't just a story about reality, it might be a complete fabrication. And to set the stage for this, we need to take a quick detour into philosophy. There's this concept from Martin Heidegger called Dasein. The gist of it is that we're not just passive observers, like a camera recording the world. We are active players, thrown into a world that we have to constantly interpret and shape. We are co-creating the meaning of our world as we go. And that idea sets the stage for a modern scientific take. And that brings us to cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman, who puts it very, very bluntly. He says, evolution doesn't care if you see reality as it truly is, what he calls ontological truth. It only cares that you survive long enough to reproduce. All evolution cares about is fitness, not truth.
And this is where he introduces his most powerful metaphor. He says your perception of reality is just like the desktop on your computer. You see that little blue icon on your screen for a document? Is the document really a little blue rectangle inside your computer? No, of course not. It's a crazy mess of circuits and ones and zeros. The icon is just a useful lie, right? It hides all that complexity so you can get stuff done. Hoffman's big claim is that space-time itself and every single object in it is just our species' desktop interface. Okay, let's pause. If consciousness is an interface, or a story, that raises a really interesting physical question. How is it contained? You know, what gives our inner world its shape, its edges? This next theory gets into the deep physics of how that boundary might actually be formed. And this gets at a really fascinating and honestly pretty overlooked question
called the boundary problem. I mean, think about it. Why does your conscious experience feel like it's happening in here, with clear edges that separate you from the rest of the universe? What's creating that container?
All right. One really wild answer to this is a theory called EM field topology. The idea is that the brain's own electromagnetic field, the one generated by all your neurons firing, doesn't just radiate away. It can actually fold back in on itself, creating these little self-contained topological bubbles of energy. And these EM bubbles, the theory goes, could literally be the physical containers for each moment of our awareness. So this idea has a few really important parts. First, these fields are a holistic enclosure, the complete package for a conscious moment. Second, their boundaries can shift and change, which could explain how we move between different states, like from being awake to dreaming. And this is the kicker. It suggests these fields can actually influence the very neurons that created them. It's called downward causality. And the best part, it does all this without needing any new spooky laws of physics. Okay, next up, we've got a really new theory that tries to reframe this entire problem. Because what if the mistake we're all making is searching for the one single true nature of consciousness? Think about something like speed. Does an object have one single absolute speed? No, it doesn't. Its speed is always relative to whoever is measuring it. So what if consciousness works the same way? What if it's not an absolute thing, but a property that's relative to the observer? And that is the core of Lahav's theory of relativistic consciousness. What he's saying is that the subjective feeling of seeing a red apple and the objective physical pattern of neurons firing in your brain, they aren't two different things. They are the exact same physical event. You're just measuring it from two completely different perspectives. One from the inside, your first-person view, and one from the outside, like a neuroscientist's view. Whew, okay, we have looked at some absolutely mind-bending theories. So now, let's put them in the ring and have them face off, because this is where the central, fundamental conflict in all of consciousness research becomes crystal clear. So it really all boils down to this one central conflict. Are you on side one, the idea that the physical brain is just an incredibly complex machine and it produces consciousness, maybe as a useful illusion or a simplified story, like Bach and Graziano would say? Or are you on side two, the idea that consciousness itself is what's fundamental, and it's the brain, and in fact the entire physical world, that's the constructed illusion? That's Hoffman's camp. Let's make this super concrete with what we can call the apple showdown. You're looking at an apple. What is that apple really for Donald Hoffman? There is no physical apple out there in objective reality. The thing you're seeing is just an icon, a symbol in your species-specific user interface. For Joscha Bach, your experience isn't of the apple directly. It's a memory, a reconstruction your brain built from sensory data about an apple. And then there's Lahav. For him, yes, there's a real physical apple. But your subjective experience of its redness is just one possible measurement of that real object, from your unique point of view. So we've just taken this incredible journey through a gallery of minds, right? Each one paints a completely different picture of what reality is. It's everything from a simple story your brain tells itself, all the way to the very fabric of the cosmos. So the only question left is, which story do you believe? Is your innermost self, that feeling of being you, just a clever trick your neurons are playing so you can survive? Is it the fundamental stuff the universe is made of, creating reality with every glance? Or is it something in between, a real phenomenon whose nature depends entirely on how you look at it? The truth is, nobody knows for sure. The answer is still out there, waiting to be discovered. Thanks for joining me on this one.